So hemp is a much more attractive crop for society than what tobacco was. But the biggest issue that we're seeing is it's so confusing for DEA on this flower issue. I'll give you an example. We work closely with the Department of Agriculture in Florida, which quite interestingly, 3 years ago, they were probably as behind as any state out there. Now they're probably the bell cow leading the country on regs. If you get a chance, Mandy, I highly recommend go to the FDA, that's Florida Department of Ag, and look at their web page, their website, and down the right-hand corner, it'll give you their regs for hemp. You'll see probably Texas and probably Alabama come out with almost something identical. But the point of it, JD, was this: about a month ago, there was a truckload of hemp flower coming into Florida, which Florida allows to sell flower. So the way it works in Florida, you got to notify the Department of Ag everything that's coming across the state border. Really, really well ran. Okay, if you follow their rules, you could operate seamlessly there. Holly Bell's done a phenomenal job. Well, they had a secure trucking facility with fencing, locks, everything around it. And there was a truckload of flour in that facility overnight so that driver could get legal on his hours. Got hijacked. And they know exactly it was a cartel move, most likely, to blend it. And that's the big fear of the DEA, is the blending of flour with marijuana flour, because no consumer's going to know the difference.
Yep.
And I don't see a way they're going to be able to solve that problem. So I think the industry probably is going to have to face the fact that probably it would be really smart of the industry to say, okay, we get flour can't be right now. Even though the states, a lot of them are approving it. We thought with this legislative session in Kentucky, we might get a chance to get flour on the agenda, but with everything happening crazy in the spring, nobody wanted to talk about anything but what's going on in our world. So, anyways, that's just my 2 cents on it.
For sure. And I think that, I think that's largely why flour is so controversial. The law enforcement can't tell the difference between the two. And actually, that lawsuit that was filed in Indiana, where they won at the district court level, but then lost at the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, that was one of the main arguments that Indiana was making, right? Is law enforcement can't tell the difference, between the two. And so that was a difficult part. But I think what's really hard is for the small farmers, especially here in Utah. That's how a lot of them are making their livelihood right now, because the processors are paying, pennies on the dollar for biomass, and it's just not viable for these farmers to be able to grow for processing purposes, right? So that's what makes it difficult. And so here in Utah, you can't market, distribute, or consume hemp flower, right? It's not one of our approved cannabinoid products, medicinal dosage forms, as they call it here, for cannabinoid products. And so there's kind of there's a gap in the statute that right now allows online sales of flower outside of Utah, right? You can sell them into other states.
So Utah will allow the farmer to transact flower outside of their borders?
Yes, right now, but they have a proposal, so you can't do it here in Utah, right? And I know there are plenty of people here in Utah that are ordering it in from out of state, or that there are brick and mortar places here. I don't know of any specifically by name, but those sales are happening. But they've done the one thing they've done now is, so now you need a retailer permit to sell cannabinoid products here in Utah. So, and that means you can only sell Utah registered products, which flower wouldn't be one, right? So that's how they dealt with the Utah side of it.
Well, they're in the same place that Florida was in 3 years ago. That is a self-fulfilling prophecy to tell your industry, we don't want you.
Yep.
When you're only allowing you in your end state and you're only 2 years into your grow, that's just the state saying we're not ready for this.
I agree with you, because I think that we were one of the first states to jump on hemp, with the passage of Charlie's Law back in 2014. We created an industry in early 2018 and have gone forward since then. But now I think they're really sending a clear signal in my mind that certain products are okay, other products aren't, whether you're intending to sell them here in Utah or whether you're intending to sell them across state lines. So now a lot of these farmers here have shifted to well, I can't find a processor, or even if I can, I can't get enough, profit from processing the products. So I'm just going to sell flour, right? That's the least expensive for me, and I'll sell that across state lines. Well, now they're proposing something that will likely get rid of that, or at least severely limit it. So here in Utah, we follow even before the USDA issued their interim final rule, we followed the total THC model here in Utah. So now they're proposing a statutory change that will make it a violation to transport industrial hemp that exceeds the acceptable THC level, which I presume means the total THC level outside the state of Utah. And so the real kind of, I guess, unspoken thing about total THC is, yeah, when I get tested 30 days before harvest, I'm fine, but 30 days goes by and then I harvest. Well, my product by definition may have greater than 0.3% total THC, even though it tested appropriately 30 days before harvest. And now I now effectively can't do anything with that outside the state of Utah. And that was the way that a lot of farmers were being able to make their livelihood. And so now it appears that that's being threatened, but I haven't gotten any clarification yet from anyone at the Department of Ag if that's really what it means. It's just the way I'm reading it. So it makes
30 days, JD, is a prescription for failure in itself on hot. 30 days from harvest. So let me ask you this. Are there any regs on when they will test that? Is it strictly when the farmer calls, or is it a specific level of maturity and flowering? Are there any definitions? Because 30 days is a very long time. Most of the states are 2 weeks, because if you got a mature crop sitting out there and you have a dry spell before you get to it, it is going to get hot.
Yep.
So we're probably, and I'm no geneticist, but we're probably 3 to 4 more cycles of crop away from having some pretty solid genetics, in specific areas where these conversations won't be taking place most likely. But 30 days is almost, I'd love to understand how they came up with 30 days, because that is very challenging for the farmer to stay clean.
Yeah, and as far as I know, there isn't any plant maturity requirement or anything. I mean, you basically pick your harvest date. The testing, the sampling and inspection and testing just has to occur 30 days prior to when your harvest date is. So you basically
cannot harvest before 30 days from your testing date. You got to harvest 30 days.
Yep, I think, and you really can't even harvest until they tell you what your, they have to come out at least 30 days before your anticipated harvest. I mean, I guess you could have them come out and test and then get your results back and then harvest right away. But as you know, everybody wants that plant to mature as much as possible, because everybody wants the high CBD content. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? You run the risk of going hot, but that's also the risk they want to run a little bit, because, you want as much CBD and as much maturity in the plant as possible. So it really is kind of wide open, but that's my understanding, is 30 days before harvest is when you've got to set up the inspection, sampling, and everything with the Department of Agriculture. And then they come out and, and do their inspection and sampling of the individual lots, and then take them back as the official sample for testing. And then once you're notified of the results, if they're below the total THC threshold that they need to be, then you can harvest. If not, you then have to destroy everything in conjunction with the Department of Ag.
A couple questions, if you don't mind. Do you all know how many acres actually went in the ground in Utah this year?
That one I don't know. I know that it was significantly, maybe not significantly less, but definitely less than last year. I think after the way 2019 went for a lot of farmers. I know the number of licensees was much less, but I can't give you any exact figures.
I want to say somewhere around 600.
Okay, so a couple things that are tough on Utah. You happen to get your first major grow going during the worst time ever in the infancy of the industry. How much is the Utah Department of Ag working with other hemp states that have more experience? Because one of the things that's happened in the South that I think has been brilliant is those states really colluded together, and it's a good word, colluded on this one, and really took best practices, communicated heavily to try to get this right. Because, you got to realize here, it's not just an idea for an industry. It is a replacement opportunity for tobacco, which is a monster political, economic hot button. I mean, huge. If you go all the way back to the tobacco settlement, which Brian was one of the main players in the United States that got that deal done. Kentucky alone, we've lost about don't hold me to this number, but we've lost almost, I'd say 70% of our small farms in the last decade. Just because, there's not been that replacement. So you got this thing that came out that was going to be the savior for those small farm or large farm, for that matter, tobacco dependent places. And it's a typical, my background has been ag business. That's my degree. I'm not a sod buster farmer. I serve those guys. I've tried to operate and guide on the business side. And what happened last year is a typical farmer problem. They saw a gold rush. They overproduced. They made the same mistake private equity did. Everybody thought FDA would rule and the big boys would be in. And, we're seeing carnage left and right. We probably, my guess, I'm pretty close to our Department of Ag here, talk to them quite often. I'd say we probably had at least an 80% reduction in growers this year.
80?
I would say close to it. I'm kind of astounded by the amount of product that never came out of the field last year. I'm learning more about that each day. That information is really just starting to get really heavy right now, which blows me away. But the good growers, okay, which is what this industry is going to be founded upon, trust me, they're still in. I mean, they might have gone from 200 acres to 20, but they're not going away. It's the growers that came into their first crop, probably came out with about a 6% hot CBD product, right? Maybe 8. That when this thing crashed and burned, everybody cherry picked the high CBD, reasonably compliant THC. What's going to be interesting is to see how the DEA relaxed the in-state of hot product. You got everything from 0.5 that states allow for transport, because look at it this way. When let's say you extract it and you get it down to a crude, and then somebody needs to take it to a distillate, right? And maybe that facility doesn't take it to distillate. Well, that product's going to be hot. How do you deal with that? You might have started with a legal product in the field. It might have been clean. The other challenge you got in this game, and this is why people like me let the government do what they're going to do, and then the recommendation I have for anybody that's involved is quit cutting corners. Quit trying to find ways to circumvent the way the Farm Bill's written. And I will tell you, slamming down isolate for Delta 8 has created our own industry problem by our own industry players. And I pray that the pirates that are still left over right now that caused this, because sooner or later they'll be gone. Because it just hurt a bunch of farmers. I can't share with you the state, okay? But let me share something fascinating with you on how the government is trying, okay? And I got to be really generic here because I'm under some NDA. There is a program right now for this harvest on a state that has done very few crops, okay? Where I don't know if it's been approved yet, but I do know that the FDA has been at the table with this particular department to take hot crops and rather than destroy them, because you got to have somebody on site from the government agency when you destroy a crop, right? So there is a experiment that's supposed to happen here in the next few weeks where hot fields can, and they're not going to be able to do a ton of them, okay? But rather than destroy a hot field, which, in some cases could decimate a farm family, they're going to bring mobile extraction to that. And hey, I'm on the phone. I'm on the Facebook Live. I got to go. Sorry. Yeah, they're actually going to allow mobile extraction of that field, okay, while it's wet. So that creates its own issues, right? Extract that THC off and allow for that product to still be marketable. Now, the big debate right now is that extracted THC going to get destroyed? Is that going to be destroyed, or is it going to be used for research? The state entity is pushing hard for that product to be state researched. And I think that's the logical way to go. But I'm very anxious to see, number one, if that program actually gets legs, and two, it will be a statement to the industry that is we're trying to figure this out together. But when you got people pushing the envelope like what the people that did Delta 8 have done, they're hurting us. And I there's plenty of people who will jump down my throat on that. They can jump all they want. We're pretty in tune with the federal government on this. You don't poke bears, man. You just don't do it. It's unnecessary right now. And my word to Utah would be, if you can't make it work under the Farm Bill right now as it sits, sit tight. You don't have to put it in the ground yet. Let it be. And let this thing work its way through, and let the industry be friendly. Now, I'm not a big government guy. Okay, know that. My background, if you knew my story, I'm probably as libertarian as you'll ever dream of being. But this is a government action that we're extremely in tune with the individual that pushed it over the goal line, and they want this to help farmers. That's the only reason why this got approved. Had nothing to do with anything but trying to help farmers. And when you bring in the big business, when you bring in and when you combine that with the fact that it's being delivered by vape, why don't you just poke the bear as hard as you can? Because vape's a bad word in DC right now. And quite frankly, probably rightfully so. I'm off my soapbox on that one, Mandy.
Well, but I think that these are real things that we're battling. I know they're not easy to hear for some people in the industry, and a lot of our industry leaders are, like you said, they're producing vape, or a lot of our big suppliers of our product from our vape companies. And so it is a real topic, and it is a real subject. And when we're combating, or when we're looking at where the industry really lies, I think that it's a real topic.
It is, and here's the thing. I am very excited. I was shocked, but I'm excited. Because I've been working with a few entities here lately that are doing nothing but extracting flower. They don't pull the leaves. They don't, the people that are grinding the whole plant, they're not going to survive. That's just not going to work. It's causing too many extraction problems, and it always will. But I've seen a couple of operations lately that are doing nothing but flower extraction. So they harvest only flower, which you can do, and they're extracting it. And man, I'm seeing some amazing results on what that is doing from an efficacy standpoint. And let's get down to brass tacks, guys. All this stuff being sold, smoking flower, definitely a great delivery system, right? As far as getting it in the human body. But what I'm seeing right now is the industry's finally woke up, and people realize that what's in a bottle of tincture or in a capsule, the amount of active ingredient in it is so small, all right? The reality of $80 500 milligram tinctures, those days are gone. We're looking probably at my belief long term, when you go through the supply chain, which my background is 27 years in the food industry, from inception to consumer. And sooner or later, the product's got to go through supply chains. That means you got to have distribution margins, the whole 9 yards, everything in it. I think you're looking at 500 milligram tinctures, high quality, good quality product. They'll land somewhere between $39, $49. There won't be many companies that will be able to pull that off. But as this thing, because we haven't even brought mainstream consumers in yet. Does anybody subscribe to Brightfield that's on the call? Hey, Chris, how you doing, man?
I was going to say, I'd like to introduce Chris. Chris is actually very well connected and a great resource in this.
Awesome.
I'm excited to have both of you on, or all three of you on.
Hey, Mandy, always looking for brothers and sisters to connect to for the good of this industry, because that's where it's going. But Brightfield is, my whole career, I've pretty much had to do things without data on anything disruptive. And Claire and that group, they are fantastic. And it's helped us keep from making a bunch of bad mistakes. Unfortunately, it's quite costly, as you well know, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the initial phases they brought on a few players to, on deals as they've grown. But the data that's coming back from them is crucial. I would suggest anybody that's serious about connecting their product to the consumer, which is the only game to play right now, by the way. Mass production right now, you're going to die. It's just until FDA rules, that's just on the sidelines, period.
Yeah.
But budget 24 grand to 36 grand into your pro forma to be able to pay Brightfield for your first year, because it will keep you from getting hurt. So anyways, that's my plug for Brightfield today. Chris, tell me about you.
Well, did I come up at all in the call before this? Any information about what's going on with my plight in Utah right now or anything? Sorry I'm late, so I don't know what was covered and what wasn't.
We really haven't covered a lot. JD and Rick kind of dove into what we're seeing and what Rick's opinion is on the DEA ruling with the Delta 8. And kind of talked about what we were seeing in Utah as a whole, but not as any one specifically.
Gotcha. Okay. So I've been in the industry for about 2 years now, and I started as one of the co-founders and CEO of Hemp Exchange. And so if you know,
I think that's a valuable resource.
Yeah. So that was me and my team. We've since exited from Hemp Exchange due to we'll say difference of opinions.
I'm familiar, not with yours, but I'm familiar with difference of opinions.
Yeah. So the entire team that was running Hemp Exchange, we're now doing something totally different. We started a company called Kairos Venture Group, and we plan to have several different entry points in the market. And the one we're working on currently is called Project Hemp Flower. And basically, we're curating top shelf quality product. We do our own full panel safety testing. We make sure it's Delta 9 compliant. And then we have celebrity judges review the product so consumers can get a good idea of what they're smoking before they smoke it. And then we sell it online. That's going very well for us right now. We're finding that the consumer market on smokable hemp is larger than I thought it was when I was at Hemp Exchange.
I agree with that.
And it's growing fast. And I think it's going to be, I think we haven't even scratched the surface of its potential yet. So many people don't know about it. And there's so many high THC smokers that have tried hemp once or twice and it was garbage product. And then they just turn away from it forever. And so I'm slowly earning a retry with some of those folks. And everyone that I've got to retry it goes, this is a different level. I didn't know hemp could be processed this well. And it's because they don't understand it's the same plant. Even marijuana smokers don't understand that hemp flower is the same plant. It's not some weird subspecies of it. It's just bred for different cannabinoids. And anyway, so that's what we're doing now. And I don't know if it's a good segue to talk about the Utah specific issue. If that's what we want to talk about on this call, Mandy, I'll sort of let you dictate that.
I'm here to serve you guys on what it is y'all want to discuss and just share what experience that we have gotten since we got into this in the very beginning.
Oh, great.
My partner, so he wrote the farm bills, both of them.
Oh, fantastic.
He's the biggest reason why I sit here in the hemp industry. He and I have been together for about 17 years.
So you kind of know what you're talking about then.
I listen. I will tell you flat out what I don't know. If I get asked a question, I don't. Let's put it that way.
Awesome.
And I try to share experience more than I do to give advice.
Yeah.
So really, he's also in Kentucky, and so when we talk about where we're at and where Kentucky's at, and I know it had come up in our call previously, Chris, just so you kind of have an idea of your connections and where Rick is.
How are you guys going to get Mitch to help your state out there with hemp?
He already did more than his fair share of that. We just got to keep everybody from realizing this is not a gold mine. Our farmers were overreacted and they paid the price.
Yeah.
And that's as simple as it gets, man. I mean, I'm pro farmer. I've served them my whole life on the business side. I'm an ag degree guy, but not on the production side. Agribusiness. My whole career has been in the agricultural world. And it's Kentucky made one, and I'm very close to our Department of Ag guys, but very progressive They run a great ship, honorable people. But they made, I think, one small tactical error for last year's crop. And previous to that, you had to have a signed contract. Now, because of Jim Cannon and all those guys, that didn't mean you were getting paid, right? But you had to have a signed contract to get a license.
Right.
Last year, in my opinion, my humble opinion, it was a little premature. They took that signed contract restriction off, and we had licensing for over 50,000 acres, which we believe about 30,000 went to ground.
Right.
Right now, you look at the overall sales in this country, the amount of hemp grown last year will supply a few years under current volume levels.
Mm.
So, and Kentucky being one of the leading producers, probably top 5, Carnage. And then you got a couple of groups. There was a Tennessee auction last fall that really was a huge mistake. We had spoken to a few of those people saying, do not do this now.
Yeah.
They want to get ahead of the game and dominate the auction side. And it was the beginning of the end of last year.
Yeah, I know. I had a couple people there, and it was tragedy.
When you're looking at going from the crazy numbers that were out there that we knew weren't sustainable, right? I mean, it's a commodity, guys. At the end of the day, it's a commodity. It could be a value add depending on where you go, but and then you're sitting at an auction, and from what I had somebody there I was on the phone with, and it's somebody I respect immensely. He goes, Rick, this is the worst day in the history of hemp so far in our early stages. I think the top bid they were seeing out there was 50 cents.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it set a tone, and it was picked up by the national news.
Yeah.
And that just really
crushed everything.
It didn't help us. Let's put it that way. I mean, the market's the market, but it didn't have to crush that hard that fast.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, though, I'm a staunch defender of what Senator McConnell has done. We're extremely aware of it because my partner has direct contact. You know, believe it or not, what people don't realize about Senator McConnell is his greatest hope, his legacy is the Yale Farms.
Mm-hmm.
City boy overall, my hometown of Louisville, but he's, you know, I'd encourage you, write this thing down, Brian Furnish Hemp, Furnish. You get a chance, Google it, go to YouTube, and you'll see his Senate testimony last year. I believe it was in June. And you'll understand how McConnell has done everything he possibly can and will continue doing so, in my opinion, to help the hemp industry. I don't know if you were on when we talked, Chris. Hemp's viewed a lot differently than out there. Hemp is a salvation product potentially to help tobacco farmers get back on their feet.
Right.
And keep us from continuing to have evaporation of family farms. You know, our farming operations here in the state, till you get the purchase area way close to Mississippi, they're very small. Most of our farms are 100 acres or less. Here in Kentucky, we classify a farm, and it might be a national program. If you're 10 acres or more, you can be a family farm. So I can vouch for the fact that Senator McConnell's doing all he can. He's really been occupied here in the last 9 months, though.
Right. I just,
he is the president, trust me.
I wish he'd help I wish he'd help the state get rid of their smokable ban.
Well, you know, it's funny. There was a very strong opinion by somebody I'm very close to that was going to happen this year. But all hell broke loose early, and the legislative session wasn't even going to entertain anything outside of what was the hotbed politically. So you couldn't get anything on the agenda here this year.
Yeah.
They actually got marijuana, I think, in one of the houses. I don't think it ever got to the floor, but we're getting closer to a marijuana vote here. But the legislation that was written, basically, even if they had passed it, it would have been impossible for people to access it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But the smokable flower thing, I can tell you right now, and as long as nothing crazy happens, a very powerful person I know very well, number one on the agenda is to get smokable flower approved in Kentucky. I can't say it'll happen. I just know that person's got pretty serious influence.
In Kentucky?
Yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was overlooked, in my opinion. Plus, I think it's also something that probably was negotiated because DEA's just got a hell of a time differentiating. They're out there, you know, in the throes of what they have to do.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate either, guys. You know, 60% of the DEA budget when the 14th Farm Bill was passed was eradication of marijuana. You're talking about a lot of federal jobs that have got a lot of political tails to it. I mean, This was it's actually kind of miraculous that hemp got approved, to be honest.
Yeah, I get that.
That's a really good perspective. I mean, that's something that, we talk about. Why is it so hard? Why don't we just legalize it? Why doesn't it just change? Here we have this plant. Why don't we just turn it over and it's different? And I think that is another example that's really just not talked about. Is look at the number of jobs that are lost in our police force and in our government.
Well, it's not really lost as much, Mandy, as it is redirecting things. I mean,
Sure.
we in our area of the country, and I think it's pretty rampant everywhere, but why are we spending money on, and believe me, we're hearing this more and more from government and legal entities. Why are we spending money on hemp when we got an opioid problem right now that's killing way more people?
Yeah.
And it's moving, but you got to realize, I mean, think about it. Government doesn't move fast. Entrepreneurs do.
Yeah.
Hey, you got a major class, and there's probably a good reason why it's that way. I hate it sometimes. All those entrepreneurs, we know what we're doing, and we know it's probably for the good, but not everybody gets that. And we quite often don't give enough detail to convince people.
Right.
So that's just the way it works.
It's hard to convince an agency that has been, so anti-cannabis in general since its inception to all of a sudden say, hey, we're going to carve out this one area. And then you talk even more about flower, and you talk about the ability to, the inability to differentiate. But what makes it difficult is a lot of people reading, of the Farm Bill, suggests that, that hemp flower is legal. And I know that they've fought several lawsuits over this. I mean, it's one of the things they lost on in the Indiana lawsuit. The lower court said, hey, they gave them the injunction, right? Against, in total. Well, the Seventh Circuit said, hey, I'm sorry, our read of it says the only thing they can't do is mess with interstate commerce, right? Well, now in Texas, they filed suit, but theirs is a little bit different. It's under state law, and it was an administrative rule as opposed to something that was, statutory. So, but they've got a temporary restraining order. I'll be interested to see if they get the injunction. What's just so hard is what I was saying earlier is the regular everyday hemp grower is going to find it really hard to survive. And that's what's, I think, difficult here in Utah is we knew we couldn't market, distribute, and consume it here in Utah. We know that's what the law says, right? So the farmers now have found a way to be able to kind of be self-sustaining and sell that product across state lines. And now we're hearing that may change. And I just think, for certain people, that's going to completely upend their business. For others, it might not, right? Seed producers, and other people. And we don't have, and Mandy can speak to this too. We don't have the industrial side here, rare, ready to go, right? We don't have the infrastructure in place to just put that, say, okay, hey, if we can't do flower, or the total THC requirements are going to be too stringent on us, and we can't just kind of morph more to the industrial side. So it's just the growing pains are going to be tough, and it just feels like instead of working together with government, it's now working, farmers against government. And that's sad because all that's going to do is grind things to a further halt, in some way.
A lot worse,
growing pains.
The more that you push back on something that's already, you got to realize perception's reality in government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the way entrepreneurs operate. Okay. And you got a clash right there day one. Here's the thing that I would encourage you all to consider. Okay. You might want to write this name down because this is, in my opinion, he's the most powerful guy in hemp. There's an attorney y'all might be familiar with. His name's Jonathan Miller out of Lexington, Kentucky. He's the managing partner with Frost Brown Todd, which is a very large Southeast law firm. Jonathan is the guy. When Brian Furnish formed the Hemp Roundtable, he was the founding member. He did it with Jonathan Miller. Jonathan Miller is a hired gun available to anybody out there to work with on hemp. A phone call to Jonathan, an engagement with Jonathan, caused Indiana within 48 hours twice when they raked product off shelves in the year 17, got it right back on. I mean, next day he's at the state capitol. It turned out it was all politically motivated for advancement of office. But the problem with that is, who cares? Because it wreaks havoc on business. if I were sitting in a position like you guys are, or your industry is out there, there's two people I would turn to talk to. One of them, Brian Furnish. They're all available out there. They get the course, and Jonathan Miller, because they can speak to any attorney general, any legislative arm, in absolute true fact and reality, not emotion, not what we want, the facts. Which, when you're in a position like you are, especially, and we saw this in Florida 2 years ago, you got to have a great cannabis director, whether it's marijuana and hemp in a state or just hemp only. There's got to be a great director within that Department of Ag, right? And obviously Utah's following the pilot program because they're managing through the Department of Ag, right? Not a land grant, correct? You know, when you start bringing players like that to the table, it's a much different conversation. Emotion never plays into this, and that's the mistake that growers make. I've seen it too many times. You know, the last 18 years of my life I've spent serving small farm operations, helping them become big, and we even took one on public, believe it or not, 2 years ago in hemp. It's money well spent, and these guys are passionate about it. So, I mean, if I were you, and you, because it sounds like you're at odds at the very least, the way you're describing it, the legislature or the administrative arm of Utah, right? Chris, you're probably familiar with Jonathan Miller, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, we're on Facebook, so I could speak candidly. He is a badass.
Yeah.
And he's honorable, and, you know, he gets paid, but he's worth every nickel.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to speak a little bit to the costs. Like, I want people that may listen or may want to understand the loss of our hemp farmers until even our industrial market were to pick up, right? If that's
it's all industrial, Manny. Everything's under the Industrial Act.
Okay, so hemp flower, being able to grow for hemp flower, and the ability to, the revenue that it provides for our industry, not only the jobs and all of these other things. But Chris, speak a little bit to where Utah's at, and Rick, where are other states at comparatively, right?
Yeah, so
related to potential, and I think the potential is really where the key is by not having a hemp program supported in the state of Utah. What are we at risk of losing?
Yeah, so I know for a fact, Rick, you're very aware, you can't survive on the biomass scene as a small farm already.
No.
Right? Unless
that ended almost 18 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. So the biomass market isn't a real market for farmers in Utah right now. And the fiber market's non-existent yet. Especially, I mean, there's pockets, and there are some farms that are producing a couple thousand acres of fiber in the country, but
it's just done bringing money, Chris.
Yeah, it's not profitable enough. I've said this for the past 2 years. For fiber to take off in this country, there needs to be a giant capital injection to give the industry a shot in the arm to get it kick-started so that the machine starts running. Right? We need to push that stick shift down the hill and jump in and pop the clutch. But the starter's not going to start it otherwise.
Can I jump in real quick to support what you just said?
Yeah.
All right. So about a year ago, we were working with one of the largest publicly traded companies in the country, and they're producing all their fiber in France. It ain't hard. It's not real hard to figure out who it is.
Yeah.
And they were looking at bringing a plant to Kentucky, and Brian and I hosted them at Brian's farm. And top shelf people. I mean, the type of company, if you can get them in your state, you're cooking with gas, right?
Right.
I hope that's the term y'all use out there. That's what we talk about. And I was blown away. I mean, these guys were dead serious. We had a change in political office that basically killed it because it changed our economic development arm. But here's what I took the guy to the airport, and he told us. He said, "Listen, you guys have got more going on than anybody we're trying to deal with." I appreciated the compliment, but I looked at him and I said, "I need to understand something." And we had triple-digit millions committed, okay, to be able to make this work. But I didn't know how truly expensive a first-rate processing facility would be.
Oh.
what am I looking at as my partner would, because he does all the political stuff. What are we looking at from a CapEx? He goes, well, if we want to go low end, it's 250 million.
Yeah.
If we want to go high end, it's 450 million. You know, these are serious games played by serious players. The problem you run into, and I listen, my life and my endearment is to small farmers. They don't get it. They do not understand how capital serious and intense this is, the risk involved. And, you know, the challenge that you got right now, based on what you told me, if you're growing 600 acres, I'd say a lot of that came from an entrepreneurial view of being able to sell flower.
Yeah.
What's flower going for out there right now, Chris?
So
Good flower
here, greenhouse is going for about 300 to 350 a pound. Outdoors,
it's down about 20% already.
What's that?
That's down about 20% from this time last year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, outdoors sitting at 225, 250. Indoor is where it's still killing it. Indoor is anywhere between $800 and $2,200, depending on who you're getting it from and the quality.
Let me share an opinion we've got. You're not going to like hearing this. The future of hemp is not an indoor grow. It will not be sustainable.
So I disagree.
It's not going to be there.
I disagree, and here's why. There is a huge consumer demand for marijuana top shelf quality smokable hemp.
You just said what the problem is right there. You got to bring in the government perspective of what you just said. They want nothing to do with that. Everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what government entity is. And listen, the last thing I want to do is debate or be abrasive, but you have to understand the political, what's the right word I'm looking for? How soft we have to be right now politically to get this industry where it needs to go. And anything that is about a marijuana duplication, train of thought replacement is not going to be viewed properly at all. And then when you combine the fact that a lot of the delivery system is vape related, okay, or whatever, that's another big hot button in federal government. It's a big problem, you know, because when you start looking at that, the first thing that they're going to go to is we're worried about kids getting flower and acting like they're smoking dope. Now, whether that's a realistic projection or not, I don't know, but that's, at the end of the day, we have to realize, as radical as anybody wants to be, we are at the mercy of federal government on where they're going to take our industry. I believe that deeply, and the only reason why I believe it is we're reasonably well connected to that chain of thought.
No, I believe that's the chain of thought, but at some point too, the government has to be held accountable for laws they pass. They can, but they shouldn't be able to just reinterpret law how they feel like interpreting it. And that's part of the problem is that, let's make no mistake, the reason the hemp industry exists is because of the cannabinoid side of the plant. The whole entire financial ecosystem for hemp is 100% cannabinoid driven. And to say that, well, we don't really want that side of the plant. Well, that's the only thing that exists right now. There is no fiber market. And smokable hemp has been the driving force in that for a long time.
So there's a company, and I don't disagree with where you're coming from, but you got to, that's the wrong way to put that. My son's always on me about being too blunt, Mandy. So
No, be blunt.
You got to look at the long-term perspective of the government. And believe me, like I said, I'm a libertarian. Leave me the hell alone. Let me do what I do, right?
Yeah.
But we have to respect the fact that, one, however you want to look at it, the government allowed us to do this. All right. And one visionary really pushed the government to get it done, because I know the exact story. You have to look at this from a perspective of how much chaos it creates in DC, especially, not to mention state government interpretations, okay? And you combine the concept of the marijuana states that DC definitely is not trying to help in any way. They're still upset about that, off the record, of course. But you have to look at this idea that the pushing of the envelope of what the Farm Bill basically states, trying to tell the government how it should be interpreted is it's going to be a tomfoolery act overall. That's the reason why I'm a big advocate of the reality of what a Jonathan Miller will bring to a conversation. All right, he can help people not waste their assets, their time, their energy, and their emotions on where it's going to go. Do I think hemp flower should be legal? Yes, I do. All right. I would not have had that perspective 2 years ago. All right. But let's talk about fiber for 1 second. One of the companies that we basically built their medical platform is called Ananda. All right. They're owned by Ecofiber out of Australia. They went public in 2018. Yeah. They just purchased a $59 million North Carolina processing facility because their whole game, and this is one reason why I don't engage with everybody that comes at me. And believe me, I don't have them lining up the door, so I don't want to create that perception. But I usually get involved in big picture type projects, and I'm usually short-lived in them because I get paid to tell people how ugly their babies are. All right? And that's really the facts of it. Because when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars capital on the line, it's kind of an ugly world. I don't care for it, but it's how I sustain my life. But they came in and they were very upfront with me. They had 200 and some odd million raised of 5 major investors in Australia, all honorable people. And they said, listen, our game is fiber. We believe carbonization of fiber is going to change the world. And, we got to get there. We got to raise money in the easiest path, which is medicinal. And we need somebody to help us move our needle because they weren't getting off the ground. They've been trying to monetize for 6 months. They just weren't getting it. And their online was horrendous. But I said, well, tell me what your plan is. And they showed me, and I would encourage everybody to look at a video called Hemp Black, if you haven't already seen it, on YouTube. It's real. It's them. That's the name of their fiber line. And they said, we have to raise capital. We got a list, which they call it in Australia listing, going public. And we got to raise the capital to be able to get in the fiber game because there's no infrastructure hardly in the world anymore, especially the United States, which is where the hemp-friendly laws were because of Brian and McConnell. And, we got to get there. Our whole motivation is to get to that. That's where the real money's at. Carbonization of hemp fiber is a world-changing situation. So they went after, and they were diverse. They had a plan. They now have as their CEO of their medicinal division, the former CEO of AmerisourceBergen. So they now have moved to the fiber side. They got forced in it. They weren't going to launch fiber till Q3 of this year because of COVID. They put masks out back in April. 160,000, I believe, a week. Couldn't keep them in stock. $20 a daggone mask, dude, wholesale. So fiber's where it's going to be the big money long term. It will not be medicinal long term.
Right.
And when you start getting into these heavy debates, you got to realize you got monster pressure coming from the pharmaceutical industry. You got monster pressure coming from the liquor industries, and and we're starting to see a lot of movement on the medical practitioner side, outside of chiropractic. I'm talking about MDs, and there's one group here we have in this community that's very progressive and extremely well represented. It's got a lot of hospitals and a lot of treatment centers that's going to look seriously at the hemp line. It's all coming, but in Utah, your challenge right now is you're on your first crop. The amount of acreage you're there, everybody's it sounds like they got their eggs in the basket of hemp flower. I think long term, if I were in Utah right now, I'd be going around like a crazy man telling everybody, create a boutique line that you'll sell in your state and try to be the dominant brand in your state and go after independent pharmacy.
Can you do that, Chris, right now? You can't sell it in pharmacies.
Not flour. I'm talking about extracts. Can you extract there?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can extract.
And you got to realize it's going to be very difficult long term outside of farmers markets for small farms to be able to play as this thing scales. The ones that establish their boutique brands and carve out their niches And we learned very quickly last fall, and I'm not always right, guys, but I preached from day one based on having some really great info politically where this was, right? You better connect to the consumer now. Because if you're going to produce to supply people, businesses, it's going to be a capital black hole like the tech industry was in the very beginning. And we found out really quickly last fall, the only companies that are standing right now in any type of health are the ones that have consumer presence. I will give Ananda all the credit in the world. They had a brilliant plan. They just needed to connect to the right people to make it all of it. So I think fiber's where it's at, though. I agree with you. It is capital intense. I think you're dealing with a commodity crop, even with the medicinal side. The margins aren't going to be a whole lot different for these guys. It'll be a little bit of corn and soybeans and all that. Probably maybe a little bit less viable, maybe, as this thing settles in. But make no mistake about it, your average grower will not survive in this game. You're going to have to create premium products. We're seeing this now. The shakeout that's happening in our market right now is your top level growers are the ones that are going to do well.
Well,
they're not trying to monetize retail. They're just growing.
Which is where I hear Chris saying the flower market, there really is a market because there, especially in the indoor grow and the boutique flower and understanding that maybe way it's presented, it really is in the same way it's crafted as the medical and recreational cannabis. I mean,
I think flower will be legal. I just think it's going to be a rough ride for some areas.
How do you see us being able to get there? Because I think there is this. What I hear today is there's this huge loss in 200 say growers in Utah alone, or for not being able to grow quality flower, or how do we bridge that gap to legalize flower on a federal level?
Well,
what's your time frame? What do you see?
Utah's not a marijuana state, right?
We have a medical program.
We've got a medical cannabis program.
Well, if you've got a medical cannabis program now, and it's Utah pretty much like every other state, they use the medical to get to the recreational.
Utah has no intention right now to ever go recreational. Every time I listen to any legislator talk about it, the phrase slippery slope to recreational is always used. So it's very much entrenched in the medical. And interestingly, hemp growers here, we do have something in our statute that will allow them to sell their products into the medical side. So a hemp grower here can sell their flower as long as it is compliant on the hemp side to a medical cannabis cultivator that can then sell it down the line into a pharmacy. So there is a way for your flower to go to be sold in Utah, but it has to go through the medicinal cannabis side. And
that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really weird. So right now as I was saying, we have this thing where as a grower, I can't market, distribute, and as a consumer, I can't consume hemp flower. But if I'm a medical patient, I can then go buy that same flower that I can't have otherwise through a medical cannabis pharmacy here after it's sold from a hemp grower to a medical grower and then processed on down the line, and it can show up in a pharmacy. And I think that's coming. But that's really the only way, if this law gets passed, that's going to keep flower from crossing state lines. Essentially, that's going to be the
flower, though. That's strictly flower. If you're doing self extraction or whatever, you could take that directly to a pharmacy on extract, right? On tinctures and all that.
Yeah, and you don't even have to necessarily do it that way. You can do it straight to a retailer that has a permit. They can sell their own cannabinoid products.
So they basically told you guys they don't want flower in the marketplace right now.
That's the sense we're getting.
Pretty much the limits. That's pretty much the only thing that's changed with limit is flower sales. And exporting out of state crude and distillate, which is another gray area that was sadly not addressed properly from a legislative level across the board and a regulatory level. But
in Utah or federally?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
There are some opportunities there. There's no question, Chris. Let me ask you this though: did you not say earlier that you can ship flower out of state?
right now, but not at the
That's
same time.
insane. God bless you. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're trying to end. I think that's what they're trying to end with this thing, the legislature. And like I said, if you're going to still be able to do it, it's going to be extremely immature flower because it's going to have to comply with our total THC requirements. And Chris can probably tell you that very immature flower is not going to sell. So it really is going to effectively end the flower market, other than that small niche where you can sell it as a hemp cultivator into the medicinal side. But our medicinal side right now is incredibly limited in the number of players. We only have 8 licensed cultivators, 7 licensed processors, and there are 14 pharmacies, but only now 4 are open. And I'm not sure how many of them are even actually purchasing flower from the hemp side, because they themselves can grow that same flower without regard to total THC requirements, right?
Well,
they have
really. Wow.
Yeah, they can grow any variation of
Are these traditional pharmacies, JD?
What was that?
Are these traditional pharmacies, or did they pick the name mistakenly pick the name to call those licensees pharmacies?
Yes.
They call dispensaries.
Massive mistake right there.
Yeah, it's really similar to our alcohol system here, but even more controlled. So 8 licensed growers, 7 licensed processors. The processing licenses are unlimited. So as many people that want to process as can, but as you know, being a processor without a cultivator to get product from or a pharmacy to send it to on the back end, good luck, right? I mean, that's going to be difficult. So right now it's very limited. And I'm hearing that some growers are getting ready to really ramp up their operations, and hopefully that'll help with supply. But even though hemp farmers can sell their product into the medical side, if the medical side can already proliferate those products on their own, it really isn't a viable option for them to move their hemp flower product.
No,
well, they're carrying a Schedule 1 in those quote pharmacies. Let me ask you this. I think I know the answer to this, but I got to ask it. How politically connected were the 14 licensees? Okay, you answered it, JD. I see it. Guys, here's my suggestion. And this is based on watching what's going on in Alabama, Florida, everywhere else. You're just going to have to let your political nonsense run its course for the short term. I will tell you, our experience is the more people complain and raise Cain rather than come with a group that's represented properly, keywords, and sit down at the table for fact-based, not emotion-based conversations, is the only way you're going to get through your mess. And so, in my opinion, and maybe come out with the result that a person like Chris is dying to get, because I can tell it's driving me nuts.
So this was my approach already, Rick. I reached out to the director of the cannabis program at UDAP. His name's Cody. And Cody has been participating in the CBD Collective meetings. He's been participating in Utah Can Group meetings. And he says over and over and over, like a broken record, we're here to support the industry as best we can. We're handcuffed to statutory rules. And we have to make regulatory rules to back up those statutory rules. But I'm here for the industry. I think the industry should be driving the decision, not legislation driving the decision. And so he's very pro business. And so I thought, I want to sit down with this guy, because he does have some industry folks bitching at him and kind of taking the aggressive approach. And so I want to sit down with this guy and have a very polite and calm, non-emotional, fact-based conversation with him. So I prepared like a 6-page document with a bunch of issues the industry's facing, very pointed. Here's an issue the industry's facing. Here's a potential solution. Here's the impact. Here's, yada, yada, yada. So I brought problems, I brought solutions, and it wasn't a complaint session. It was, how can we work together? And what can the hemp industry do to help you perform your regulatory job easier? What can we do to make your life easier? And so we had this really candid conversation that was very productive. But in that meeting, he was saying that he's like, look, I'm pro flower sales. You should be able to sell flower in the store. He's like, but you got to get legislation on board. Well, this is the same asshole that turned around and suggested to the committee that we ban this stuff. So he blatantly lied.
Hello, political world.
Yeah, he blatantly lied right to my face to say he was pro X, Y, and Z, and then suggested the exact opposite changes. And come to find out that he's ex-law enforcement also. So I kind of felt like I got the whole law enforcement switcheroo of, let me act like I'm your friend and real casual, and you're not going to get in trouble. Just tell me
your game plan so I can wreck you.
Yes, exactly. And so that's exactly what I feel that conversation was.
Based on, and that's not uncommon, Chris.
Yeah.
What you're dealing with, and you're a person like me, you take somebody for word. When we built this right here, okay, we did this in 03, 04, 07. I had never worked in political environments. Had quite a large contract. Kentucky and North Carolina were the only two states that took 50% of that tobacco settlement money for infrastructure projects, entrepreneurial projects, for trying to get tobacco farmers alternatively making money. I didn't care if it was multi-level. I didn't care about any of it. Just how do we keep people on the farm and keep their families going, maybe to the next generation. So I hired people from all over the country. It was a pretty substantial contract. And brought some people in from California with the movement. There's a reason why I'm telling you this story. I made the fateful decision at that time to manage Frankfurt, which is our state capital. Oh my God. I dealt with what you just described constantly. And I'll never forget, I sat in a meeting, and this was a very big project that's going to really change the infrastructure of our dairy farms. Me across the country, the greatest example of how indentured servitude still works in this country. It's unbelievable. I understand what dairy farms got to do to sell and so on. And that's when I got told, you're dealing in reality, Rick, we deal in perception. And I about died. So my point, Chris, is if I were in your shoes based on experience, I would make a phone call. I'd first of all find out if I can raise some funds, probably 10 to 20 grand. And I would call Jonathan Miller. Jonathan will give you a call. He'll give you time to find out where you're at. My knowledge, I'm not extremely close to Jonathan. I got immense respect for Jonathan. But I got a problem, I call Jonathan. He helped me immensely about 3 months ago. And I would tell Jonathan what you're trying to get done. Jonathan's not the type of guy that's going to engage with it. He can help you. But in my opinion, the only way to circumvent that politics, because Jonathan was our state auditor, and he did run at one point trying to get out of the primary to run for government. Okay? And let Jonathan, if he chooses to engage, work with your place, because he will hold political entity, in my opinion, speak for the fire for the legitimacy of law. Whereas folks like me, you, JD, and Mandy, when we go to our state capitals, we get glad-handed to make us go away. And they tell us what we want to hear because they're banking on the fact we don't have the wherewithal or knowledge to hold account. All right? That's just my suggestion. You got, to me, the way you're describing 600 acres, flower's the big deal. That's where y'all make money. By the way, are you all primarily an auto flower grower or traditional grower outside? I don't care about indoor growing.
Photo period.
Please.
Photo.
Right. So,
yeah.
So you're full period.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you're very aware that the altitude, hemp is not like altitude. So your yields are probably a little different.
Yeah, we actually have some pretty great outdoor flower possible. I'm consulting with a farm that's growing in the Salt Lake Valley, and their plants are massive. They look healthy, and I think we're gonna get some great flower out of them.
You know what their yields would be per plant, and how many plants are planted?
We've got about 1,500 plants per acre. And looking at the plants, if I had to guess, I'd say they probably get 3/4 of a pound dry out of each plant.
Those numbers are low, both of them.
Yeah.
You know, where we're at, it's nothing to have 3,000 to 3,800 per acre, and well over twice that number. And that's why flower is so important to you guys. You got to create a boutique, niche-oriented product.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh dang, man, I remember how bad Florida was in 2017 when we put it in independent pharmacy as a Schedule 1 narcotic.
Mm-hmm.
Now think about that for a second. We literally pioneered into the independent pharmacy arena because we had a couple of state pharmacy boards. and it was a Schedule 1. So I'm walking into a pharmacy because you couldn't do it on the phone. And you're looking at Chris that owns that pharmacy, who's got his DEA license, everything on the line, his whole livelihood. And you're asking to stock a Schedule 1 at the time, and we were able to get a few hundred stores to do it, and we were off. But we talked to those pharmacists. We found out what their concerns were. We made sure we didn't cross those lines. I would recommend, and believe me, I love a good fight. But it sounds to me, JD, based on our previous conversation before Chris got online, that it's a very tough. Where's y'all state capital at? Is it Salt Lake?
Salt Lake City. Yep.
So it sounds to me like when you all walk in the halls of Salt Lake for a meeting, you're already under the gun. Is that reasonable or not?
Yeah.
Based on them telling you one thing out of one side of their mouth, the other, Chris, you're in political folly. The only way I think you get out of that, and there's risk involved, but it's far superior to what you're fighting right now because you're pulling. Did you have hair before you started this, Chris?
More than I have now.
Hey,
and there wasn't any gray in here either.
I wasn't, before I started my project with Kentucky Proud, I wasn't gray. But
I'm not far behind either one of you guys, so I'm losing mine too.
If you put somebody in, because they'll do their research, they might not even know who Jonathan is. If you put somebody like that as a guy, as a person that's going to come in and lead your communications there, they're going to look at this as this is a real serious situation, as opposed to making you leave that day high as a kite saying, I got an advocate who basically sold you down the road in front of the review committee. Mm-hmm. That's not uncommon. I've dealt with that so much for 3 years in Frankfurt. I'll never stay. They couldn't give me enough money to take another state contract to get on my way. It wouldn't matter how much. So that's my recommendation on that, based on the experience of what I've seen. Because Florida has worked closely with him, and I think right now, my personal opinion, based on their leadership, their commitment, where they're at, their regs, their labeling rules, I think Florida's got the best game even over our state right now. And you're allowed to sell everything there, including flour. So that's my recommendation.
I'd be interested in furthering this conversation and helping, because I think that this is where an association and a collective becomes so powerful and valuable. There's a lot of people that this is going to affect, and understanding what everybody's needs are and where it fits, and then where future opportunity is what I want to bring forward. And so I'd love to future this conversation or further this conversation, Rick, with both Brian and
I'll ask Brian to engage, which he'll always do one conversation anyways. And he's not God, but he is the reason why hemp's legal.
I think
him, and actually people don't understand the role Jamie Comer played. Kentucky passed their hemp law before hemp was legal. Jamie approached Brian when he was Commissioner of Agriculture, and he wanted to form a hemp commission, which was illegal for Jamie to head. He asked Brian to do it. Brian told him he was crazy. And he said, Brian, look at it for 2 weeks, call me back. And about after 5 days of Brian doing some research, he said, I'm in. And Kentucky passed a law stating basically if the federal government ever put hemp legal, they won. That was critical to how we were able to, for one, there's no better place to grow it than this region, period. There's a place in China. But, and you got to realize, guys, McConnell down, we have high motivation to do anything on the farm that we can justify to help tobacco farmers. So, but I agree. I just think you're up against something, because it sounds to me like, Chris, that where y'all going to really have your niche is growing flour and selling flour.
Yeah.
And you got to have big guns. And I just think you need to let, it's not that you're not serious, but I think you need to let your state understand that y'all got commitment financially to bring. There's nobody legally that's got more knowledge of this than John. And believe me, he has no biases. He's your typical attorney, man. He's out to get hired and win, period. And Jonathan's not a guy that will purposely drive your meter up. He's been very reasonable in my view.
Yeah, so I think this is a good, one thing that I did hear today is some hard news for the industry, right? That this is just what the industry is facing. And it's not that it's with the intention to squash business or to make it personal. It's just reality. And I hear this a lot from other people is if you as a business didn't prepare or set money aside to go up against some of these, it puts you in a place of real challenge because this is a high risk industry and we're paving the way for a lot of new changes. And I understand on the government side coming back and closing the loop to prevent risk or to put their intentions in place, right? Whatever that is. But yeah.
It's somewhere to go into war. Do you want to go with a bow and arrow or a machine gun?
Right.
It's really what you're looking at. And there's no guarantee of success. I will tell you this, our opinion, and it's nothing but that, flower will be legal nationally. When? Who knows? Even though states approve things, doesn't mean that the federal government is not going to throw some wrenches. This thing that came out with DEA last Thursday has got the whole industry locked up. Nobody's buying anything, even though there are regs in place that allow up to a certain point to transfer from processor to processor. That is completely shut down right now. Period. We're in the middle of a couple of really nice situations to move some really high quality biomass right now. And it's a little bit challenged under the normal regs. We're good. Under what the DEA said Thursday, we're not.
It puts a lot of gray.
You can argue all you want, okay, of what's right and wrong. The problem is if you happen to have bad luck, for one, you could lose millions of dollars worth of biomass. By the time it gets released, it's probably going to get ruined. And you could be looking at some serious legal consequences. It's not, we all know what happened in Washington State when they approved marijuana, right? And we know how badly that was handled by the government and what it did to farmers. I think that might have created one of the highest suicide rates in the history of farming in this country for that period of time. And several of them went to jail because they had no choice but to cross state lines, right?
Yeah.
You just, those stories are atrocious. They're avoidable. Government doesn't always figure out what this is properly. That's why you got to hire guns that have got a much stronger ability to convert to reality what government does, and that's usually it.
Here's my biggest concern right now with attacking this with a bulldog or attacking them in any way, shape, or form. How long is it going to take before we get a temporary restraining order against the state? And what kind of damage can they do to the businesses in the state that are operating against their will in that meantime?
Because the market will put it to the point where when it does get approved, you're too late, right? That's what your concern is, Chris?
Yeah, my concern is that they will shut down farms and businesses that are violating their rule, confiscate material, and bankrupt the businesses that are suing them before it ever actually gets to even a federal judge's decision.
You talking about state or DEA?
State.
Okay, first of all right, experience, okay, perception. No legislator wants anything to do with that, period, because they're worried about getting reelected. All right. The second thing you got to look at, that's our experience here. Okay?
Yeah, Utah's a different scene though. No one's worried about getting reelected because it's so deep red and it's so ran by the church that whoever the LDS church wants in pretty much gets in, and that's
okay.
80%.
And those people want to stay there because the power goes to the head. I've got a strong opinion about state legislatures.
Yeah.
Like I had to answer to 2 committees of over 15 people, and the main committee I had to answer to, over a $5.9 million contract over 3 years, had 2 people that had ever dealt with being in business for themselves.
Right.
I can tell you right now, that's not a good place for us to be. Right. And power goes to the head. So I get, and I can't speak because, it's very common knowledge for those out there how that state's ran. Right. But those people in those places earn the right to get there, and they don't want to give up that power seat.
Yeah.
Right. So they're not going to cross anything. And what's the church's stance on him? Have they made a statement?
The church has not made an official statement. They did make a statement on medical marijuana, and their statement was it's a violation of church rule to smoke the product, but you can vape it and you can use an oil.
You're kidding.
Which is exactly which lo and behold, is exactly what regulation allows for, which, go figure.
You're so much better off to smoke flower than you are to take it to a vape. Health-wise.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me because Utah is very known to be a very botanical, medicinal world, and it's probably the largest advocate of MLMs there is of any state in the country.
Yeah, that's why it blows my mind, because this is right up. Otherwise, this is right up Utah's alley. It's that nutraceutical MLM kind of natural, holistic, essential oils side of sort of product that they could really get behind, but it's too much like marijuana, and so it freaks them out, and so they won't even listen to reason. They just don't want it.
If you look back at the true history of how hemp became illegal and what our country did, being the only seed stock in the history of the United States of America that got destroyed.
Yep.
And the fact that they went back then, think about how hard it was to go around and literally went on farms to burn everything.
Yeah.
Right? And you look at the powers that truly got that real story done, it was all protection of wealth and markets.
Same thing is happening.
Yeah, and that's the reason why people like Jonathan Miller can give, what's the right word for people like us? Those that are trying to do the right thing by many, to try to help it become less for a few.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And I tell you, man, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but without the right people going at where you're at, or anywhere for that matter, I think it's a very difficult road. Because they take, Jonathan's not going to get emotional about nothing. And when you start talking about farmers, emotion's a big issue, huge issue.
For sure. And that's what I've been hearing, as a cannabis attorney here in Utah. There's not a lot of us, that are here doing it. And we need some of these national advocates to be able to push some of it through as well. You need some of these heavy hitters. I'm not going to, I've been doing this since cannabis became legal here, after the passage of Prop 2. But it still falls somewhat on deaf ears. And it would be nice to be able to have someone like him to at least, partner with or follow behind, because it does sound like he has that experience. He's going to bring what I call the baseball card stats to the table to be able to present it in a way that makes sense to them on a factual level, because I think they do get these farmers that call them and just go off on them, and they come from a place of emotion. And as an attorney, that's what I try to remove from the equation, right? That's why you hire an attorney. So, you have somebody that's non-emotional advocate for you. But there's something more that's needed, because you say these things to them, and, as Chris said, you say these things to them and you feel a sense of support, but then you see what's proposed through the legislature and you're like, man, that just doesn't make sense. And what's really crazy is I've asked a number of people hey, who should I talk to in our state legislature? Who would we talk to on this? And the guy that really has passed, that spearheaded a lot of the hemp legislation, he's not going to be running for government again. He got knocked out in the primary.
What side of the fence is he on? Republican or Democrat?
He's Republican. Both on both.
Is it heavy Republican in Utah?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There's no Democrats here. It's all Republicans.
JD, I apologize. I didn't realize you were an attorney. I didn't have the time to. I usually try to research people.
No worries. No worries.
I will tell you something. That even gets me more excited from a standpoint of what I think it could do. Because obviously, you're very passionate about this. You're trying to make this a niche of your practice, right?
Of course.
Now, are you a single shingle, or are you part of a group?
I'm part of a firm, about 30 attorneys.
Okay. All right. And I'm assuming you all lobby.
Yeah, that's the problem is I have not gone into lobbying, and the firm firm's policies are on lobbying, because trust me, I would love to be able to do more of it, because I'd love to go up on the hill and be able to tell them more of what the reality is. You know what I mean? Even though that might not be their perception, right? I think they need to hear it more. And I just don't feel like on the hemp side, there's been that same push as there was on the medical cannabis side from the advocacy standpoint. So I feel like it's much more reactionary. The law is changing in a reactionary way, as opposed to hopefully being guided by a conversation between both sides. And I know that's somewhat pie in the sky, because the legislature is going to do what the legislature wants to do. But I just feel like if you're not hearing from industry and those that represent industry, it's hard to know how we're ever going to have decisions that are made that are good for us. You know?
Hey, Bandy, I'm going to text you Jonathan Miller's contact info. If you'll forward that to JD.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Here's the thing that I just got kind of excited, to be honest with you guys. I think an attorney to an attorney conversation, JD,
I was already thinking
good.
that.
And I would guess, and I cannot speak for Jonathan Miller. He's way smarter than I am, okay? But I would think with what Jonathan's been fighting, he's forming a network of attorneys across the country. But the good news for you guys is you don't have enough growers involved right now where it's a serious problem. All right, but it's also stunning the ability for people like Chris to get an industry going.
Mm-hmm.
And people like Mandy, sounds like she's trying to be the information side of this and the connector, which is kind of really where I come from. I would arrange that conversation. Mandy, I would try to stay close to this if I could. I learned a lot in the last 12 months once I got away from Amanda about what's going on with this, watching Brian operate and what I get, because Jonathan and Brian want to do this, okay? I mean, they kind of the two guys that really went to DC, formed the hemp round table. Brian got out for really good reasons. Hey, this industry is subjected to everything else that the industry is. But groups like you guys are trying to do the right thing. And I can only imagine what Brian went through in 12, 13, and 14, because I wasn't a part of that process to get where they are. And all I want to see is this product get what it deserves to be after many generations of being put on shelves. I mean, do you all realize that the first seed that came to this country was lucky to go for 4% CBD? Brian brought the first legalized seed in the country to try to grow medicinal, and he realized very quickly after a crop that all they were getting was basically genetics that were fiber related and seed food related, and scrapping out like the Chinese have done for years out of the food and fiber products. And the genetic side of this thing has been a mess. It's been this. And quite frankly, Chris, that's part of the problem we're dealing with right now. As we started the conversation, I think you were on with this part, we're probably 4 more generations of crop away from having genetics that won't be as tough on being hot as we're dealing with now.
Right.
We're on our 7th crop. And where we came from 14 to now on stats is phenomenal. But man, a 30-day approval to harvest. I know what we see here when it gets hot in August, September. Most of our state doesn't plant right now till July. We've learned that as well. Early July, late June is the prime time plant here. But you guys also realize we got a lower cost of production than anybody because we do not have to dry. Our tobacco barns, the way our tobacco crops still work, and we've got tobacco infrastructure still over. A lot of farms don't even grow tobacco. But a tobacco hemp farmer can bring his tobacco crop in, and as he takes out his tobacco from drying, it's ready to go in. And we have very little mold problems in the central part of the state. In the western part of the state, so we don't have to have all this drying infrastructure costs. And I understand Colorado will set it and leave it on the ground, let it dry. That fascinates me. So JD, I think you got an opportunity.
Yep.
At least to have a conversation to meet somebody that's in your corner.
For sure. It's funny. I follow him on Twitter, and I'm aware of him generally, and so it'd be nice to talk to him for real and see if he and some of these other folks you mentioned can help us, because I agree with what you've said. This is our way to survive right now as a hemp industry, is going to be through flower, and we have to get the legislature to see that, because we're not doing anything without them. Otherwise, we're just a lot of angry folks.
Hey, Chris,
so we got to get them to buy in too.
I got a question for you, Chris, because it sounds to me like you're one of the leaders of the growing side and the marketing side. Would you be open to a checkoff program for your flower in your state with farmers?
Elaborate. What's a checkoff program?
Well, one of the most brilliant things that ever happened in the history of agriculture is when the Beef Council came up with a checkoff program. And so basically back in the beginning of the days, every head of cattle, they paid $1 for in the beginning. It's more than that now. And it's how they created the marketing programs for beef. That's how what's beef that's what's for dinner came up. They were able to hire all the things. You need to find a way, because legal is going to be an issue for a while. And you got to be able, the problem you have is when an issue as serious as what you're dealing with now comes up politically, you got to be able to react to it immediately while it's hot. Would you agree with that, JD?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you got to strike while the iron is hot, because otherwise they'll just control the narrative and they'll control the legislation. And then trust me, getting ink off of paper is a lot harder than getting ink on paper.
It's no different than starting and closing a business. It's really easy to start one. It's hell to close one.
That's right.
Any business. But what I would suggest you look at, Chris, because this is a good core group of people here. You got a lady that's very passionate about trying to go with this, and what I do know of her, she's done it at her own risk and not a whole lot of income coming from it. And I'm very, you got to have people like that. Right? I would look at, because you got the margins there, right? They're there, and anybody that wouldn't participate in it's just greedy. You got to have some type of fund you're developing to be able to support people like JD to do what they do. And without it, either that or you got to find somebody out there that's a philanthropist that'll give you, a lot of money.
I think
and
this
those
is
are out there too.
This is where we call on our members of our association, right? We have 200 licenses in Utah that.
But you need something that's generated off sales, Mandy. The problem is when you ask them to give up money, they're taking after-tax profit money, or for if it can be done right, depending on what it is for the pre-tax. But if you do a checkoff program and it's done in state with the producers, and there's a lot. I'm assuming you're all tracking, Chris, right now with the state very minimal, right? Please.
Pretty much non-existent.
Right. So you're dealing with an honor system that creates its own challenges. Okay. But and that's why you get the core group of farmers that are the real deal. People that aren't going to skirt the laws, that aren't going to try to push the envelope constantly, that want to do it in a manner where when they put an asset at risk, they know that the law's not going to yin and yang them. I've got very little empathy for people that get product seeds when they produce something that's gray. This is a black and white world. There's no gray here right now. Gray's risky. So I would look at a checkoff program, because flour is a highly profitable entity. You're not dealing with biomass to where you can get killed. And I would look at creating that.
We've talked about something like this that's similar to is this similar, Chris, to the green book or a blue book?
No. They would work in tandem really well together, but it's not the same. PACA is a packet of regulations, if you will, that control activity around the supply chain movement of product. I don't know if a checkoff program is built into PACA already, if there's something like that, but they're two different things.
Does Utah have a state agricultural brand like what we have called Kentucky Proud here? Most states do. Do they have one like Utah Proud or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Utah Made.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And it's strictly agriculture, or is that production of anything in Utah?
Anything in Utah.
So it's not tied to just ag.
Right. I don't believe it's ag, because don't quote me on that, but I don't think so. I think it's anything.
So in Kentucky, we have Unbridled Spirit, which is the state brand proposition, and anybody outside of agriculture can use that. Then we have Kentucky Proud that has some regs to it. They let the alcohol industry in, which I think is BS, but it's also very powerful, right? And alcohol didn't want to come in, bourbon industry didn't want to come in until it became a $210 million brand. And I could give you some really good guidance, but I would approach your Department of Ag, if I were you, to try to look at, and believe me, egos play in this game. Politically, there's nothing more than, is your all's ag commissioner voted or appointed?
Appointed.
Okay, so the governor, is it a cabinet position?
I don't think so. I'm actually not sure I'm not sure how he's appointed. Do you know, JD?
No, not as far as I know. And then not only do you have the the leader of the ag department, but then you've got who Chris was talking about, Cody James, who's been installed as the manager of the medical cannabis and hemp programs here in Utah. So it's not as if whoever heads our ag department is also heading the cannabis and hemp program. That's a separate individual.
But he's underneath the ag commissioner's purview, right?
Yes. Yes.
Do
And
they
we
have their
have-
own marketing budget and their own staff? Is it a reasonably serious department?
Yes, I think yes and no, because part of the problem they're having is they are tasked with, you know, regulating both sides, both the medical cannabis side and the hemp side, and they're using, in my view, some of the same people to do both sides. So there's a lot for them to do. Let's just say that for not a lot of people necessarily. So it's a yeoman's task, but you know, it's all concentrated under one person, and there's some policy analysts and some different people, the testing department and all those sides, but they're doing both sides of the equation, both the medical side and the hemp side.
Do they have a director of marketing under agriculture?
No, I'm not. I can't answer.
Okay. Mandy was telling me that alfalfa is a big deal. What other crops are serious about ag in Utah? Are there any grain crops there at all?
That's definitely outside anything that I do. The crop I deal in is cannabis. So
I understand, but there's a reason why I'm asking, because what you got to find is a way to get the ag department excited about how they can benefit from a relationship with a group of legitimate hemp marketers that are going to make their statement, we want to help Utah farmers. And I'm speaking from experience here. I'll be glad to share that in another conversation with you guys.
Perfect.
How are we doing on time, Mandy?
We're done. We're actually a half hour over. I just let you guys keep working, but I think it's good information, and I think that it's a good starting point. I hope that it got, you know, everybody's wheels turning as far as how we can move forward, or a perspective that's a little bit different maybe. And I think it gives good perspective for outside of Utah. Sometimes I think we get stuck in our own bubble. I do, and compared to what we're dealing with here, when really there's a way bigger picture to consider.
I'd like to leave you with this thought, Mandy. In this group, because I can see commitment. If I were looking at this from a perspective, I think approaching, and I would need to understand a little bit more about how whatever the ag political office is, right? But you can, and Chris, this is really heading towards you. When you're dealing with government entities, and believe me, I had to learn this the hard way. It was very painful. I got pride because I was too outspoken. Greatest work I ever did in my life, and they targeted with me when I went out because we had a change of office with change of party. And I pissed off a lot of the other party. You're going to catch a lot more bees with honey on this fight. And if you bring an outsider in, it's got the impeccable reputation in the industry, sending the message that they've got to deal with reality as opposed to placating their citizenry, that's a big move. And I don't think, personally, Jonathan's that expensive. That's the route I would take. Plus, I think you're going to freak them out if you yin and yang like that. Because right now, I'll guarantee you all they're hearing is negatives coming in from farmers. So anyway, I'll leave you with that. Be glad to help any way I can, guys.
Well, and I think that, you know, when we talk about as an association or as a group collectively, coming up with the solutions and the, you know, opportunity that's there or opportunity that's missed by not having it here is very different than just hammering them with loss. And I think that's something we commit to as professionals and as an industry, you know, leader. That's the message we want.
I learned the hard way. Politicians sleep at night well, knowing if somebody's life gets destroyed.
I take it back.
That's fact, guys. I've lived it. I've seen it. I've watched it. They don't lose any sleep over it, and we get all emotional about it because we care.
Yeah.
So that's why you got to hit them head on with stuff you got to pay attention to.
You're exactly
anyway,
right. Okay,
it's an honor meeting you guys.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, Rick.
Meet you.
Look forward to meeting you personally. I want to get out there and see your beautiful state. I've only been able to eat dinner at an airport out there, man, passing through.
Well, next time you're even in the airport, you better give me a call.
Yeah,
we'll meet you there.
Yeah, until we get these trade shows going again, Mandy, I doubt I'll see you.
I know. Well,
That's another thing that's hurting our industry so bad, guys. The loss of momentum of trade shows was way more devastating to us than it would be the food industry or anybody else that's established.
agreed. Well, and that's
All right.
something we'll carry conversation on there as well as the industry opens. But I'll reach out, stay in touch, guys. If you need anything, I'll connect you. I'll send out an email to make sure everybody's connected. Anybody else need anything? Don't hesitate to reach out. And again, thank you, everybody. Chris, JD, Rick, I appreciate you.
And I'll send you Jonathan's contact, Mandy, as soon as we have it.
Excellent. Thank you,
Right.
sir.
I'll take care, guys.
Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
have a good one.
Yep. Thank you.